Hello, I'd like to show you guys 30 seconds of the best day of my life. That was El Capitan in California's Yosemite National Park, and in case you couldn't tell, I was climbing by myself without a rope, a style of climbing known as free soloing. That was the culmination of a nearly decade-long dream, and in the video I'm over 2,500 feet off the ground. Seems scary? Yeah, it is. Which is why I spent so many years dreaming about soloing El Cap and not actually doing it. But on the day that video was taken, it didn't feel scary at all. It felt as comfortable and as natural as a walk in the park, which is what most folks were doing in Yosemite that day.
This conversation around fear and death, I mean, this comes up. I mean, it's impossible for anybody to have a conversation with you without that. I mean, you get annoyed, you get tired of talking about it.
No, I think people should think about that stuff more. Yeah, so I mean, when was the last time the average person thought about the mortality and really made choices that could lead to death?
I mean, my perspective...
Other than lifestyle choices, eating a Twinkie or whatever.
Right,
but those are so far removed that you don't get that immediate sense of dread.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my God, I'm so afraid. If I eat this, I'm going to die in 40 years from heart disease. It's like a different...
Right.
I don't know. I've sort of accepted a certain level of risk, and I kind of know that there's certain danger, and so when you see accidents happen, you're like, yeah, I mean, I know that there's a degree of risk involved, and that is the degree of risk.
Yeah, you said one time, I saw somewhere you said, high consequence is not the same as grave danger.
Yeah. I mean, so I often differentiate between risk and consequence, because people are like, oh, what you're doing is super risky. And I'm always like, oh, what I'm doing is super high consequence, meaning that if something happened, I would for sure die. Talking about free soloing walls. But it's not necessarily risky, because the risk is the likelihood of me actually falling off, and that you can't really determine that from seeing a picture or seeing a video clip or something, because that's something that only I really know, how solid I am on the wall, like how likely I am to fall off of it.
I think it's similar to when you see someone like Laird Hamilton.
Yeah.
What people don't realize or perhaps underappreciate is the lifetime of work that went into building up to that.
I mean, he can hold his breath for minutes, I'm sure, and he could be pinned down, and he can survive a lot that if I fell off a wave like that, I would for sure die. But he also probably appreciates the difference in the consequences, because falling off a wave like that isn't guaranteed death. I mean, big wave surfers are rarely on a wave that you're going to die. I mean, people wreck all the time, and they do occasionally die. But it's not like guaranteed.
A certainty.
Yeah. I mean, they often get pulled out.
But I think it's more about the relationship between the understanding or appreciation of the certainty of death vis-a-vis, the fear impulse. And from what I understand, you've just developed an ability to have a presence of mind and a mindfulness to manage that in a way that is unique. But it seems like what distinguishes you isn't necessarily your physical capabilities. It's your ability to be present and manage, the mental chatter, so that you can be completely in the moment of what you're doing and keep that that fear response or whatever it is at bay, so that you can be extremely focused over an extended period of time. But taking it back to the beginning, when you started climbing, when you were 11 or 12,
or maybe 10, or 10.
Yeah, and it wasn't initially out of the gate oh, this guy is just a phenom. No,
and that's the thing, is I've never been physically gifted at all. I mean, after 20 years of regimented practice and training, I'm still not as good as a lot of people that. There are a lot of people with physical gifts in climbing, and I'll just never be as strong a climbers as they are. But I mean, climbing's a big sport, and people sort of go in their own directions. And
so if I was to ask Conrad or Jimmy or any of these other guys, what makes you different or unique or special or able to do the things that you've been able to do that no one else has been able to do, what would they say?
I don't know. Actually, it's interesting you mention them, because in a way they both sort of represent a generation before me, slightly more old school, adventure-y, big mountain type experience. And so compared to their generation, sort of the big wall type dudes, I am much more physically gifted as a climber. But then compared to my contemporaries and people of, coming up in the new generation of climbing, I'm very, very weak by comparison to them. Standards have been steadily changing. And so compared to somebody like Conrad, I'm a much better technical climber, and that's because I grew up climbing in a climbing gym, and you know, starting at the age of 11 or 12, I was practicing technique and working on my footwork, and you know, I got stronger fingers. Whereas Conrad wasn't climbing until he was an adult, and he was climbing outdoors, and he was never.
It's a different kind of climbing.
Yeah, it's very different.
And you kind of came up at this perfect time.
Yeah,
where
I really
climbing
did.
became a thing that you could actually do as a living. I mean, if you had been born 10 years earlier, it might have been a different situation.
Yeah, for sure. And not just that that being able to be a professional climber sort of became an option for me, but also I grew up with gyms. I'm the first generation of gym climbers. Exactly. I didn't even decide. I just, you know, I was like, oh, I'm just going to go climbing all the time, and eventually it sort of morphed into making a living from it. But it's interesting at events now having kids come up and say, I want to be a professional climber, and
It seems interesting the way that it kind of developed for you, because you went to Berkeley, right? And then
well,
you
for a year.
Right. You went for a year.
Yeah.
You're going to be an engineer, and you ended up dropping out, but that was sort of around the like your father passed away.
Yeah, right
Someone
before.
else passed away in your life as well? Your
actually,
grandmother?
both my grandfathers had died in the previous year or two.
And when you look back on that, what is do you feel like that was did that give you a perspective on how you wanted to live your life that compelled you in a way?
I mean,
that
looking back on it, it probably, it definitely added a sense of urgency to things a little bit, or a certain, a good reminder that life is finite and that, you know, you should do the things that you want to do. But it's funny though, because, you know, looking back on it now, 10 years out, you're like, oh, I dropped out of school to become a climber. But when it was happening, I was taking a semester off so I could go climbing, and then I took another semester off, and then I took the next 20 semesters off or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's not like I dropped out. I just like didn't ever go back.
Right. But you had this thing that you loved, and you wanted to express that in your life, and you wanted that to be a bigger part of who you are.
Yeah, something that I cared about much more than education at that time. It's kind of lucky that it worked out that way in some ways. I mean, I definitely felt all those societal pressures and familial expectations and all that. And so, I mean, part of it was, you know, both my parents were professors. And then, you know, and it was just expected that the kids are going to college, you know, that my sister and I would both go to school and get an education.
So when you stopped out, what did your mom say?
Well, she was fairly supportive. Well, the thing is, it wasn't that I was quitting college. It was that I was taking a semester off. And also that year I'd been invited to Youth Worlds. Like I'd gotten second in nationals. So it was kind of like, oh, you know, go to Scotland, do Youth Worlds, you know, climb a little bit in Europe or something, like take the semester off, because it was during the school semester. And so it was a really good excuse to take off a few months. Like Dad had just died. I was going to Worlds. It was all sort of like, you know, things were a bit of a change. And so I took 6 months off, and then I just, you know, didn't go back. But so there was never a point where it was like, I'm never going to go to college again. Because I'm sure had I said that, she would have been a little bit more, you know, resistant. But then it just sort of played out that now I'm an old homeless person.
Well, yeah, I mean, it organically just grew out of this thing that you just loved, right?
Yeah,
you know, and there's something really pure and beautiful about that. Like, it wasn't like, I'm going to be the best climber in the world. You were just like, this is what I want to do. And I think
it's funny because when you're on the path, you never think you're following a path.
Right.
You know, I was just like, I was living in a car, living in tents, just going climbing a lot, and it doesn't feel like a path until many years later when you look back. And you're I was very committed to rock climbing.
It's the motivation. Is it love? Is it a sense of adventure? Is it a competitiveness? Like, what's the psychology behind what motivates you to do all this? I
don't know. I mean, it's a lot of things, I guess. I mean, part of it is definitely trying to see what I can do, what I'm capable of. I mean, especially with El Cap, it was something that I felt like I was maybe uniquely capable of doing in this generation, at least. I mean, I'm sure people will do it in the future more, and, you know, might not be that crazy in 20 years. But at this point in time, I was like, if anyone is going to do this, I think it could be me if I apply myself to it and if I really care about it. And, you know, being the first to do something like that, I mean, that hasn't always been a huge motivator for me for various projects. But for El Cap, I mean, I did kind of want that. Right. You know, I was like, I mean, you look at that wall and you're just like, I don't know, it's so proud. Yeah. You know? And I'd spent all my years of climbing looking at it as the ultimate objective, like the pinnacle of rock climbing. And I was like, that could, you know, I could do that. That could be me. And so then, you know, I sort of felt obligated to try.
Yeah, I think there's something that like a childlike innocence about you know what you do. It's so primal. It's like, there's a mountain, I'm going to climb it. Like there's that
it's
thing.
Elemental.
I need to get on top. Yeah, it's very
basic.
And I think to ask someone like yourself, like, I had Conrad on the show a while ago, and I found the same thing in him. It's like if you ask somebody like yourself, like, why do you do what you do? It's just like, this is who I am. This is it's an expression of something so deep and so innate in my personality and how I'm hardwired.
Why like I
can't give. Yeah, exactly.
Because it's awesome.
But I mean, for you, it's a love. For somebody else, they're like, that's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Like I wouldn't go anywhere near that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's how I feel like about singing. If I had to go up on stage and sing, like I might as well just kill myself. Like it would be a disaster. But a lot of people love, music, performance, any of that, and that's great. I mean, everybody has something that they're passionate about.
Right. So what